Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Sorry for the delay. We
Hello.
know a lot of you were getting off another meeting, so we just wanted to give you time in between to do what you need to do. So thank you so much for being here. We know that you can be anywhere else, so we're grateful that you're here today for this exciting webinar entitled Crafting Your Sustainability Message Through Storytelling. This event is being brought to you as a part of the Maternal Telehealth Access Program, or MTAP, which is funded by the CARES Act. And again, we're so excited to open it up to a broad audience of people interested in maternal health and hope that it would be useful for you and your work. As some of you are aware, MTAP is a collaborative project funded by HRSA, MCHB, and MTAP works collaboratively to improve access, accessibility, and the quality of maternal telehealth before, during, and after pregnancy. Next slide. And who's this person talking to you? My name is Natalie Hernandez. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Community Health and Preventive Medicine and the interim director of our newly established Center for Maternal Health Equity at Morehouse School of Medicine. I've been in the field of public health for 15 years. I have a background in community-based participatory research, women's health and equities, health policy, and really focus on social justice and social determinants of health. And why MTAP, my organization, is a partner, as I mentioned before. And right now I have a couple of projects where I'm examining the integration of telemedicine to address maternal health inequities and improving sexual and reproductive health outcomes for BIPOC women. I'm excited to be here today to learn from our panelists. I got an opportunity to meet them prior to today, and I'm really excited to introduce each and every one of them to you. Next slide. But before we begin, we just want to discuss a little bit of housekeeping. As some of you know or can see, you have been muted. We just want all of you, of course, we want it to be engaging, but as you think of questions, please put all of your questions in the chat box, just so we can respect our panelists. And at the end of the discussion with the panelists, we will have time for questions for you to be able to ask questions to our participants. Additionally, there will be a recording of this webinar, and it will be available to all of you on our website, as well as some additional resources as we go through. So today we're here to talk about the power of storytelling. Next slide, sorry. And the power of storytelling to convey the impact of program, build relationships, and attract investment in critical maternal health work that you do. Good stories inspire empathy and motivate people to take action. They can bridge cultures and create a sense of unity across educational, religious, and other differences. And I do know, although this firsthand being an Afro-Boricua, that's something that we do in our communities, is this way of storytelling. It's amazing. And today we're joined by 3 storytelling experts who have employed storytelling as a means to connect people and promote ideas and messages. After I introduce each of our guests, they will have about 10 minutes to speak about the work that they do, because we know we learn from others' experiences. Then we'll have about 30 minutes of facilitated discussion before we open up the floor to questions from the audience. But I am also encouraging our panelists afterwards to ask each other some questions. I encourage you to type your questions in the chat box, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. And MTAP staff, who is also on this webinar, will keep a running list of these questions. Please make a note if there's a specific panelist you want your question addressed to. So let's get started by introducing our panelists. And I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. David Fakuni. He's a self-described mercenary for change with over 20 years as a researcher, mentor, advocate, and performing artist. David aims to equip Discover Me, Recover Me clients with the ability to proclaim their truth in a manner that speaks to their experience. Really powerful stuff. The organization strives to construct its clients' narratives in a way that's undeniably reflective of their personal and organizational values and principles. And through shaping the narrative and the modalities through which it is told, are confident that the audiences will be engaged. Our next panelist is Ivelisse Andino. She's the founder and CEO of Radical Health and a commission on the New York City Commission on Gender and Equality. Ivelisse has had a huge career in health tech, pioneering a lot of its first digital health solutions. And her prior experiences led to her where she's at now. And these are very personal experiences that she's had. In founding Radical Health, which is the first Latina owned and operated benefit corp in New York City, she sought to combine her expertise in healthcare and her passion as a community organizer. Coming from an historically marginalized community herself, like me, the South Bronx, it was there that it was important for her to build Radical Health by bridging together her neighbors around her kitchen table and hearing firsthand from voices including undocumented, women of color, elderly young people, and LGBTQ who are otherwise figuratively and literally never given a seat at the table to have a say in their own healthcare destiny. Through Radical Health, Ivelisse is committed to the task of transforming healthcare by facilitating health literacy and self-advocacy, as well as forging a relationship between meaningful face-to-face conversations with cutting-edge technology. Next slide, next panelist is, and last but not least, Mr. Ken Branson. He's the founder of Mastermind Productions. Ken is a storyteller, videographer, and photographer who specializes in helping people share their stories in an engaging way, particularly across social media. He has provided workshops to large corporations like AARP, Cisco, and Google, as well as community-based nonprofits like Durham-based Partners for Youth. Ken provides expertise to individuals and organizations who are looking to share their passions and purpose through storytelling. And these are our amazing panelists. And now I will hand it over to David.
All right, what's going on, everybody? It is a honor and pleasure to be a part of this experience. So, my story with storytelling began at 9 years old at the National Great Blacks and Wax Museum in my hometown of Baltimore. And it was the unveiling of a wax figure for General Colin Powell. So it was a really big deal because he actually came to Baltimore to see the wax figure, got a lot of media publicity, and to celebrate the big occasion, there was a impromptu like talent show like among the kids that were associated with the museum. There was this one kid, right? And he was really good at like working the crowd, like had him in the palm of the hand, and I was jealous because I'm used to being a showstopper, so I don't like anybody like upseating me. So I decided to tell a story that I heard on a radio show. This was the radio show of Mary Carter Smith, who is known as one of the greatest storytellers that we had. And I told this story to reclaim my throne as the showstopper, and she happened to be in the audience. And she was so impressed by the story that I told, which was the yellow ribbon. Look it up if you get a chance. That she talked about me on her radio show the following week, and I heard it. And it wasn't long until she reached out to my mom and asked if I would be willing to go onto her radio show and read stories. And as that relationship forged, she taught me the art and the science of storytelling. So for me, it was preservation of my African culture. It was really just maintaining my African traditions. But it wasn't until almost 20 years later that it took on a new role in a new application, and that was while I was working on my PhD at Johns Hopkins. So my first year, I took a class called Gaps and Opportunities in Public Mental Health, and it was a practicum component for the course. So my instructor found out I was a storyteller, and she asked me to complete this special project, which was to go to a recovery center in West Baltimore and teach the clients storytelling. I was initially hesitant only because I was, I just got out of Hopkins, best public health in the world. Sorry, North Carolina. Um, and I'm there to be a researcher, an epidemiologist. That was the goal. But she was adamant. She obviously rated the course, so I said, okay, I will go to this recovery center and teach the client storytelling. And that was the best decision I could have ever made in my career. That was the revelation to me that storytelling had applications in this field that I was venturing into, being public health. And the encouragement that I got through that experience with the clients with whom I worked, who became my support system through my graduate experience. I would not have gotten my PhD without them. Showed me the importance of giving people space to tell their stories. And that's how the Story Recover Me was born. It grew out of that class project. Started with me and my mom, because I am a mama's boy. No problem saying that. um, we use storytelling as a catalyst to encourage people to see and acknowledge their own story. And as they tell their story, as they reflect on their own truth, our training allows us to really elevate those positive manifestations of their humanity that are present in their story. So people who are dealing with recovery from any form of trauma. So we started in substance abuse, but we know that trauma manifests in many ways. A lot of times they don't get the chance to tell their story, and when they do, they focus on the negative components of their story. So I did this, I said that, I was in these places, which capture the essence of my addiction or my trauma. So really, it's a reorientation of how you see the same story, same exact story. But instead of focusing on those negative components, we encourage them to focus on the positive components. And again, our training allows us to hear that and to see that. And all we do is merely reflect what the storytellers, our clients, share with us. Uh, I say it's something magical about it because as a researcher, I'm still trying to figure out what that is. But I know as a storyteller that it works. There is power in the story. There is a reason that anytime there is a seismic shift in our society and in our culture, there is a narrative that accompanies it. Look no further than we about 3 weeks ago. Think about the narrative that was introduced 3 weeks ago, and now we're all talking about it. And now we all have to make a decision how we navigate this narrative. So don't tell me storytelling doesn't work. Storytelling is why we dealt with what we dealt with for 4 years. Storytelling. So for me, it's about putting the power of storytelling in the hands of people who are going to do right by it, because it's a very powerful methodology. And that is what we do. We don't necessarily we don't force anyone to be a storyteller. First and foremost, everybody in this room, everybody on this earth is a storyteller. So there's really no teaching it. You already do it. It's more so honing the craft and the art and the skill that we all possess. What do you want to do with the story? Why are you telling the story? To whom are you telling the story? Don't necessarily about that as human beings as we navigate our lives. But now that we are in a place where we recognize this power of storytelling, we have to be very intentional with those components. We have to be intentional about to whom we tell our story. We have to be intentional about the stories that we tell. We have to be intentional about the point of the story, and that's something that I'll go into later. But that defines my career as a public health professional. I call myself a mercenary because I operate in all these different spaces. No, I'm not just a researcher. No, I'm not just an advocate. No, I'm not just an activist. No, I'm just an artist. I am all those things at once. So I'm very fluid in how I contribute to society. But the common denominator is storytelling. And I have no problem saying that. It really is about sharing my truth, and it's about empowering others to share their truth. And the evidence, the data, because I know we love data here, the data are the impact, how people change, how they change their perspective, how they change their thoughts, how they change their beliefs, and how they change their behaviors. Part of what I'm doing now is trying to figure out the best ways to capture those things. But anecdotally, I have stories for days that shows the efficiency and the efficacy of storytelling. So some of the things that I'm doing now, so I do work at Florida University of Florida Center for Arts and Medicine. I'm at Johns Hopkins as well. Is really exploring the extent to which storytelling works within public health. So as a research practice, as a healing practice, as a communicative device, what is that magic stuff about storytelling that works with audiences, and how can we best maximize its ability? So I am just taking the opportunity that Mary Carter Smith gave that 9-year-old boy to be open to uh, a part of his tradition that he deserved, that we all deserve, to be connected with our traditions, to be connected with our practices. It doesn't matter how much we evolve, they always follow us. So we should always embrace them. And I always say she was a prophetess in a way, because I think she saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. I don't know if she necessarily knew how the story would go, but she knew it would be something awesome. And Mama Mary, you were absolutely right. So I'm grateful to her. I'm grateful to you all. And if you remember nothing else from me, tell your story.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much. And Ivelisse, you're on.
Okay, sorry, switch to my phone. Hi, everyone. It is a joy and an honor to be here with you all. And David, thank you for leading with your personal journey, because I actually was going to take a different approach to telling my story today, and you inspired me to tell my story. And I think my introduction to storytelling, I don't know that I would have considered myself a storyteller, originally, but for me, like I said, I'm born in the Bronx. I am, Black Latina, Black Boricua, and grew up, really as this young girl who was really told from a really young age to be seen and not heard, right? And that's how I grew up. My mom was a single mom. She had a lot to do, and it was very much like, just get in line and do what you need to do, be seen and not heard. We'd go to friends' houses, and that, we were visiting her friends. It was like, stay there, read your book. I don't want to hear you, be silent. And that really stood with me, right? I'm not meant to cause a ruckus. I'm not here to, my opinion doesn't really matter. Just be seen and not heard. And I carried that. And somehow I found my way, or I found a voice rather, in singing. And so at a young age, about 12, I started singing in my church choir. And I think that was the first time where, like, you're on stage and I had a voice, but those words weren't my words and those songs weren't my songs, but it was a great way. And I remember just the power of feeling like, oh, wow, this is a way to express myself. And at this point now, I'm being seen and heard, although they weren't my words. And so I kind of carried that with me. I grew up, did what I needed to do in school. I was a decent kid in school, and then got my break in at work in corporate. So I worked in healthcare. And at the beginning, I was also told, right, the mantra that I had at that time changed from instead of be seen and not heard, it became head down and do the work. Keep your head down and do the work. You don't really need to do anything else. Just do good work and people will see you. People will hear you. Just keep your head down and do the work. And I did that for a really long time. I worked really hard, probably twice as hard as my friends. And I wanted to just keep my head down and that'll kind of pay off. But what happened when I started working in healthcare, my mom personally had cancer. And that was a moment where I felt like, oh, wow, like if ever there was a time for me to use my voice, it's now. Her life is on the line. This is the most important person in my world. And so like, now's the time to speak up. And what was interesting was in healthcare, typically, right? I don't know what the mantra is, but it had elements. It wasn't necessarily be seen and not heard. And it wasn't just keep your head down and do the work. It was very much kind of stay quiet and just listen to what I give you and what I say. And that was a time where I learned that, like, yeah, it didn't matter who I was, what I knew, who I knew, how much money I made, but in health and in those interactions, there really wasn't a space for my voice. And I kind of kept going in my career. I kept my head down a lot, didn't really speak up, jumped into tech and was like, all right, this is it. And there too, kept my head down, started to speak up. but it's still, I didn't have the umph behind it. I didn't have the power. And what I found an outlet. And so my first like real time, like stepping in and beginning to step into my voice was when I was doing community organizing. And it was, I got to speak with my neighbors and hear from them. And it illuminated something in me where I was like, oh, wow, like I live in a world where women, Black women especially, but where we're gendered to stay quiet, we're gendered to stay small. I live in a world where in healthcare, we don't use our voice and we're not encouraged to use our voice. If you use your voice, in fact, you're probably a troublemaker. And what I wanted to do, right, was to begin to like think about things differently. And so this whole time I was afraid to use my voice. But when I started not just using my voice and my story, when I started like not just, only being seen but not heard, I was able to kind of create space for other people to do the same. And so through that, we made our way, created this organization called Radical Health that started at my table. And it was really about how now do we use our voice and our stories. And what I realized too was like, oh wait, even though I was afraid to use my voice in these like sacrosanct areas, in these systems, in these big places, I had been using my voice the whole time. I had been using my stories mostly with my girlfriends, and there was a lot of kikiing happening, still happens today. But I was telling stories. We were telling stories. We were saying this. When I think of like, speaking up around healthcare, like in hip hop, I love hip hop, but in hip hop, we've been talking about this. Kanye talks about how his grandmother, right, couldn't get care, but if she had been an NBA player, it would be different. We've been using our voice. And so it's through this radical health and creating radical health, I was like, we're going to do this. I want to create space and do that alongside my neighbors to be able to use our voice to talk, to build, to listen, and to create other mechanisms so we can talk meaningfully about what's going on and do so with our friends and our neighbors. So whether today we're talking about COVID and actually what that means to be a caregiver or to have care, to receive care, whether we're talking about birthing, our birthing experiences. And so whether you yourself have experienced birthing or you're the partner of someone or you've been birthed, right? What does it look like to talk about those experiences, to hear the oral narrative of that? And then how do we use that to begin to transform a healthcare system that has often taken away the voices of the people who are most directly impacted, and even change those narratives to suit kind of a system that doesn't really include everyone? And so my work that I get to do, we really use kind of the motto of, until the lion tells its tale, right, or its story, the hunter will always be glorified. And so I have the honor to be alongside incredible storytellers, but also the honor to hear and hold so many stories from the folks who have come before me, the folks who are alongside of me, and the many, many stories to come, where we're going to tell our tale and like stories can change. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ivelisse. And next, but just so thrilled, because again, just hearing their experiences and their stories, we'll have Ken. And so Ken, it's your show.
I love it. Hey team, again, my name is Ken Branson from Mastermind Productions, and of course, I have a story like everybody else, and I'll tell you a piece of my story. In addition, I lead a storytelling workshop for small business owners and organizations who would like to tell their own story. So I want to give you a portion of that too. So, about when I was 19, 20 years old, I got out of the Marine Corps after a year of college that was unsuccessful, and I started servicing ATMs about 19, 20 years old, right? Seeing hundreds of thousands of dollars 4 to 6 to 8 times a day at 19, 20 years old. Well, you already know what typically happens in those situations, right? I was definitely not mature enough to handle that much money, to see that much money at one time. So the inevitable happened, and I started taking money from the ATM machine. Well, needless to say, after it was all said and done, of course, they called me, paper trail, like, hey, Ken, it's a certain amount of ATMs that keep on showing up missing money, and the only common connection is you, right? So I ended up taking somewhere around about $40,000, and ended up with 13 felony larcenies in about three different counties that I was servicing. And it landed me some time in prison. Nowhere near as much time as the judge said that I should go. But by the grace of God, I had to do a little bit of time in prison, and I came out. And I started this big, burly business around video production and photos, right? 2007, one of my former pastors and mentors, he invited me to a training that he was having down in the basement of the church at the time. And it was a girl there who was, she was a part of the AV ministry for quite some time. And she pretty much just told me, like, this ain't as easy as you think, homeboy. Like, just chill out a little bit, and you may or may not get it, but just don't think it's that easy. Well, needless to say, that was the start of my business, right? I had a pack of tutorials that I got from Total Body Training. I'll never forget it. And I locked myself in the basement for about 6 days. When I say lock myself, I literally meant lock myself. The pastor gave me a key. So after any kind of choir rehearsals or Bible studies or whatever, I would, act like I was leaving, or I was just finishing up some stuff for the AV ministry. And I go back down and I'll study those tutorials like I've never studied before. Right. And 6 days later, I created my first commercial. It's on YouTube still to this day. It's completely horrible. Right. But you can definitely see the intent. You know what I mean? You can see that Ken was on a mission to be fulfilled by a thrill and excitement and edginess, and, in a video. Right. So that led me to doing some sports action photography, taking pictures and printing them out on site. That led me to doing some cinematic video work, some weddings, and all the other good jazz. Um, but more importantly, that journey led me to therapy, right? The journey led me to therapy to find out the first mentioned principle of when I started stealing money, taking things that didn't belong to me. And it dated all the way back till I was 12 years old. 11 to 12 years old in middle school, I started taking quarters from my granddaddy's ashtray. He had this big, thick green ashtray, and it was always filled with silver coins. Right, it was never any copper in there whatsoever. So during the summertime, I would go over there. He ran a construction business. He'd been a business owner for so many years. So I would need to go up to the payphone and call my girlfriend because she had went home for the summertime. Right. So guess what? There was only one way in his room, and there was only one way out of his room to go get me some quarters. Now, when I went to go get some quarters, I couldn't just take a lot, right? Because he would notice that I took so many quarters. He would notice that the ashtray is a little empty, right? And furthermore, I couldn't take a lot because when I walked back through the hallway, out of the room, through the kitchen, through the hallway, I didn't want my grandma to notice that I had coins in my pocket, right? So it all had to be strategic. Right. And therapy led me to know that, listen, it was not because I needed quarters. My grandma would have gave me anything I needed. We wasn't poor, and I wasn't going to trying to feed my family or whatever, right? It was a real need for thrill and anxiety, right? That I craved and didn't even know it at 12 years old. So that led me on a life of stealing things that did not belong to me. All these years, not because I needed it, but because I had a hunger for a thrill. And I did not know how to make it beneficial. There was never anybody to come to me and like, hey, little homie, like, I see something in you. Let's cultivate that gift. Let's nurture that gift, and turn it into something that's more profitable and beneficial for you, right? So I ran into this thing called storytelling. Right, I was able to one of my favorite rappers when I was hustling in the streets was Young Jeezy. Right, he made a song that says I switch hustles, been killing them ever since. I get paid to tell the truth, dog. It only makes sense, right? So what he was telling the guys that was listening to him while he was, proclaiming that he was selling cocaine in the streets of Atlanta, he was telling them, like, I switched my hustle, y'all. Like, I switched my hustle. I'm not selling dope in the street no more. Now I'm telling you how I sold dope, and I'm making money because you're buying my record, right? So Jeezy he flipped the hustle, and Ken flipped the hustle. I found a way to get my needs of my thrill met, my immediate gratification met through the form of storytelling, right? And it came in a very, very profitable way. Like, one time I really literally sat down and I added up all my bank statements for the last, at the time it was like the last 10 years of business from Wells Fargo, and it was over $1 million. Like, some of you might say, well, who can't make $1 million in 10 years? Well, not a 13-time felon, you know what I'm saying, with a camera and a printer and a computer, right? So, and the only reason I did that was for my own immediate gratification needs, or for my own psychological needs, for lack of better terms. I did a lot of multi-level marketing stuff, and people would get on the stage and say, "Oh, I made $10,000 this month and $10,000 this week." But my thing was, show me the check. I really don't even believe you, right? But anyway, so after I found a way to get my need met through storytelling, I just honed in on it, right, and made it that much better to serve my clients. Okay, so I'm gonna go back and forth between telling my story and a piece of the workshop. I found a way to leave it in the video, right? That's what I would title this section leave it in the video. So if you're taking notes, I'm going real fast. I'm gonna try to condense a 90-minute storytelling workshop into about the next 5 more minutes, because that's all I have left. Okay, all right. So that's what I would call leave it in the video. One of the things that I always urge my clients to do when they're telling their own space is, don't hijack the airspace. So what do you mean, Ken? One time I was in a conference in Atlanta. It was 4 convicted felons who, was trying to get on their feet and do something big with their life. And one guy got up to the mic and he asked his question to the panel. But he got up, he was like, "Hey, what up, y'all? My name is Bob Jones. My Instagram is at such and such amount. You know what I mean? Catch me on my website. We got to," and I'm like, bruh, like right now is not the time for you to come out and boost your new project or whatever, right? So at that moment, he hijacked the airspace. It wasn't time for that. So I like to urge my client, like to give my clients 4 things to do, that so they will not hijack their prospective audience or their target audience's airspace. Number one, KISS. Keep it simple. Stupid, right? KISS. Keep it simple. All right. Competing priorities. We live in the world of social media. We got smartphones. We got notifications out the wazoo. We got Zoom calls all day long. Notifications just popping up. So guess what? If your story is not engaging enough, nobody will sit and listen to it. I don't care how long it is. And some people be like, "Well, how long do I supposed to make a video?" It can be 2 minutes or it can be 25 minutes. It doesn't matter. If it's engaging enough, somebody will sit there and watch it. Okay. The third thing that you can do to hijack the airspace is putting somebody on your mailing list who doesn't belong. Just because I sent you an email because I followed up with you after this Zoom call, that does not give you permission to put me on your mailing list, ma'am or sir. Right? Technically, that's illegal because MailChimp asks you, did you get this email by the person's permission? Okay. Reiterating. It's the fourth thing. Don't reiterate yourself without somebody asking for you to reiterate yourself. Okay. 4 components of storytelling. I like to give it to it real quick, guys. So I hope you're taking notes. All right. You got to have a hero. You have to have conflict. You have to have resolution, and you got to have some music. Right. There's a soundtrack to my whole life. Right. I can give you a song for every moment of the day. I can give you some piece of music to enhance my mood. Right. A hero is a subject, person, place, a thing, a product, or a service. Okay. The conflict is honest conflict that creates doubt in whatever the solution might be. I lead with my story always because it's like, wait, you're a 13-time convicted felon. You stole money from ATM machines, but you made money as a storyteller. Like, you are able to still make a living without going back to prison? Absolutely. I lead, it presents conflict, right? So I lead with my story. Resolution, how do you plan to solve it? How can you alleviate that pain point, whatever your pain point is, right? Stories, I don't have to know anything about healthcare to tell your story. Right? I just know the right questions to ask you to be able to pull your story out. Okay. And lastly, you got to have some good music to enhance the mood. All right. And some of you guys are scientists in here. I know Dr. Fakuni is a scientist. I think he is a scientist. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but he talked to scientists when we was in our introduction earlier this week. And I know that some of y'all are all about some things that happen in the brain, right? It's some chemicals that are released in the brain when a mood is enhanced or when you tell a good story. Okay, there's a few strategies. I only got 2 minutes and I'm gonna drop this thing like a bad habit. Okay, there are 5 different strategies that you can use to leverage existing stories. Some of y'all like, "Ken, what stories do I supposed to tell?" I don't know. I don't have any stories to tell. I guarantee you do. You just heard it. Everybody has a story. Every organization has a story, and every company has a story. Identification. Who are you? Why are you relevant to your audience? Authenticity. Are you telling the truth about who you are and what you do? Right? Value add. Are you adding value to your audience. All right. Strategies to leverage existing stories. It's your story is a guideline. They really not rules. Okay. All right. And draw from what you know. Try not to tell anybody else's story. Okay. So I'm gonna start right there with the storytelling piece. I have used these tips right here to make an honest living, right? Full time. Okay. 13 years of this stuff. And people pay me big bucks to do so. Right. I want to feel like I'm credible, right? Other people will tell you I'm credible. And I guarantee you I've probably worked with somebody you know, or an organization that you worked with before. A lot of my clients use it for marketing tools. You can use it to relay your message. It's an array of things that you can do with these stories. So thank you guys for the opportunity, and I look forward to any other questions and the answers that may come forward.
Oh man, thank you, Ken. Woohoo! I love that. And you talked about a soundtrack. I teach at a medical school, and when I introduce myself to my students, I always use "Start It From the Bottom" Drake, because I also love hip hop. And that's how I tell my story about who I am, where I come from, and centering my experiences on why I do the work that I do. But thank you so much. We heard from all of our panelists. We heard from our mercenary about, storytelling as a catalyst, not being afraid to use your voice from Ivelisse, and then keeping it simple from Ken, stupid, right? Kiss. And hijacking. And he gave us some tips on how to be able to tell our stories, right? And a lot of you as grantees want to be able to know how to do that. And so we heard from Ken, but Ivelisse and David, if you can give our grantees, what advice do you have for an organization that wants to be able to tell their story, but doesn't have one in mind yet? And then how can they find their story?
First and foremost, Evilise, that proverb, that Zimbabwean proverb, that is the mantra of discover me, recover me. So I was definitely snapping, my fingers when I heard that, because that's exactly what it is. It's about making sure the other side of the history is told. But I tell people, if you don't know what story you want to tell, start with why. It's that question that we ask as kids when we just see all these new things in our existence, and it's like, why? And it's annoying as an adult because you don't have all day to explain it to a kid, or or you don't know it yourself. But honestly, that's the pivotal question anytime you're trying to express what you do, what you're about, your organization, whatever the case may be. Why? I call it the so what question. Answer the so what. You know, us researchers, we publish papers all the time. It's the currency of academia. So what? What does it actually contribute to the science? And I'm not saying it doesn't, but we got to be prepared to answer that question. So start with the why, then proceed to the how, and then you can finish up with the what and the who. Question, and this is a huge fallacy of science as I see it. We're good at the who, the what, the where, and the when, and sometimes the how, but never the why. And you wonder why people don't get science as much as they should. So that goes for anything. Start with the why. Let people know, make it abundantly clear that there's a reason and a purpose behind the work that you do. And don't be afraid to say those universal truths. Don't be afraid to say it because you do it out of love, out of a commitment to justice, out of a commitment to peace, out of a commitment to understanding. Because I guarantee you, every human being on this planet understands that stuff. So that's my one little tidbit.
I love that. And I'll second this. I think that's a great, starting with the why. I'll also say if you're an organization and you work with folks in community, I always advise just listen, right? The stories are there. And so how do you listen? And so a lot of the techniques and tools that we use, and it's kind of how I got started, is, bring, whether it's one-on-one or three people together. And, if we're writing a proposal on, somebody chat a topic, like we're writing a proposal on bread, right? The question that I often ask is just start like, what does bread mean to you? What does it mean? Tell us about your earliest memory with this. The first thing that comes to mind? And just go around. And I think there's an element of and this is just true of proposals and grants and deadlines. We have deadlines. I wait for the last minute and then I'm in a hustle till I get them in. But if you use this with time, right, that story is going to evolve. You're going to get deeper, right? And bread is a bad analogy, but if we're talking about, pregnancy or birthing or community, we usually start with community. What does community mean to you? What has been your best memory with community? What has been your worst memory? And you hold space and hold time and have a little bit of patience. The stories are there and they'll always bubble up. It'll always happen. It just requires a little bit inquisitive, asking, like David said. It requires a little bit of, right, the patience to hear. And then I think I want to echo what Ken is saying, like, then it requires just the simplicity of it, right? And I think there's also a vulnerability to say, I don't know, or I'm learning, and to sit in that. But I think those are the tips that I would offer.
Thank you so much. And piggybacking on what Ken mentioned, you use videography, you use other types of mediums to get the story out. Once an organization has crafted a story, do you have suggestions on how they get it out into the world? And how can stories be used? And Ivelisse, you touched upon this a little bit. How can stories be used in grant applications, foundation applications, et cetera? So we'll start with Ken, and then we'll do a round robin with Ivelisse and David.
That's a phenomenal question, because I actually wanted to add to the last question. Dr. Fakuni said, why, right? Ivelisse gave us listen. And I want to put, a complete package to that thing. Go provide value, right? So many of my clients are always looking for ways to convert people to sales, convert people to registration, convert people to mailing lists, and nobody is really thinking about just providing value, right? There are so many different panels and stuff that we go on and we get to speak, and people be like, I'll pay you. Listen, like, the amount of money you can pay me does not even equate to what's going to come as a result of me providing value to whoever is listening or looking to this doggone webinar, right? So that's what I would add to the last question and use to answer this next question for you, Natalie, as well.
Ivelisse, how do you get it out into the world? And then what advice do you have for using it in grant applications?
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, I often caution when we're telling stories, especially when stories are not our own, but even when they are our own, it's an element of like exploitation, right? And we want to tell our story. Look, I've written many grant applications where I'm like, help me, I'm poor from the Bronx. We've all been there, right? And I'll say, there's what have you. There's an element of that sometimes has had to happen. I think there's also an element of like maintaining your integrity. Like, my story and my trauma is not to be exploited, nor is that of my community. So when we're talking about, how we tell stories, I think there's one piece to keep in mind. I think the other way that you do that, right, or how do you incorporate it, for me, I want to just learn to sit in my own voice and to be as authentic as possible. What we do with our conversations when we have them, right? There are a few ways that we share them. So one, just sharing them again amongst communities. When we have these conversations, it's seldomly like a one-on-one, tell me your story, but we hold them in communities really locally, so that these stories are beginning to be shared, we're connecting with one another. Beyond that, right, especially when things come up that can change policy. So part of what we do is we have these stories and conversations, but then we also have this know your rights for health tech component. And what's happening now is we know that the work, both with the stories and the stories that people are typing into us, can change policy. So part of that is pulling it together to write it up, right, and propose it so that we start to see some policy changing. So there's an element of like taking these stories and making sure they move and they keep going. And then lastly, I'll say, like, on the applications, I use a mantra of like, you're going to get the real me, 100%, the Cardi B me. And if it, that should hopefully sing. And if it doesn't sing for you, then you're not for me. Not everyone has that privilege, but, I think that the more and more authentic we can be, I think that is where we need to go. And I think the more that we code switch and try to like whitewash our stories or our narrative, like it does a disservice, not just to you, but everyone else who has like authentic, real things to share.
That's it for me, is authenticity. I know the code switching game. I went to predominantly white school since middle school, so I had to learn how to code switch. But it got to a certain point, and it comes with time. So I'm not gonna act like I had all this revelation in middle and high. No, I didn't figure it out till like a few years ago. It's so hard not being yourself. It's so hard. So, in a space like academia, which is what I came up in, it seems tailor made for not being yourself. Like that's the only way you survive is to not be yourself. And I said, bump that. Like you said, Evelise, you're gonna get the real me because it's so liberating, and it really is liberating to be who you are. So the same way that I'm gonna write, not necessarily write, but the same story that I'm gonna give you when I got a bunch of Flying Dogs in me, that's a local beer, in me, is going to be the same story essentially that you're going to get when I'm writing the application, because the message is consistent. So consistency is another thing too. So no matter whether you're at the beginning of your process, the middle, or towards the end, it can be a couple year project, or it can just be in perpetuity. To me, Discover Me, Recover Me is in perpetuity. It will go as long as I go. The story is the same. The message is still clear, and it is about value, Kim. It's about what you are contributing to humanity. We are in a moment when we feel so deprived of humanity, we're craving it. And we're craving the realness of it. So if it sounds perfect, we call them BS. Tell me the whole story. Tell me that you're struggling. Tell me that you have doubts. Tell me that, you don't know if you want to go on with it. It's okay, because it's reminding me that you're human and that I am too. Most of the work that I do in public health is just reminding my colleagues that they're human. So that's it. It really, really is. And that comes through story. And then relaying it to, that's why this work is so important. Because ultimately it brings us back to our truth. Man, the ancestors already had it figured out. We don't need to make it complicated. Like they knew what they were doing. And they didn't have the complexities of our life and technology and all this kind of stuff. And, the more we live, the more we think it's so no, it's so simple, guys. We got this one shot at life. Even if you believe in reincarnation, it's not going to be the same one. So you got this one shot at this existence. Why not be as happy as you could be while in this existence? And because of that, we do the work that we do.
Tell it. Thank you so much. And a follow-up, because I know, David, you alluded to this earlier, particularly for those that are academicians and have to talk about measurement and, legitimizing storytelling as a methodology and stuff. How have you approached measuring impact of the methodology, explaining it, in a way that's compelling to, let's say, government funding, or even for other foundations? Like how are we measuring it so that we show that it's making impact in communities?
Yeah. This is the ongoing work. This is where I am in my career right now. So what I realize is that if you are leading with storytelling, narrative, any form of qualitative data, you have to, whether you've done this or not, you have to challenge the epistemology of the field. If you're not familiar with epistemology, that's literally the knowledge, what we even consider to be knowledge in the field. That's what I'm doing. I'm saying that my story is more important than this quantitative data. Why? Because it provides context. That is the magic word for any of you that want to use story. Just use context, because quantitative data gives you the who, the what, the where, and the when. It's great at that stuff, but it won't necessarily give you the how, and it damn sure won't give you the why. The stories will give you the why. It's the context that elevates the efficacy and efficiency of any public health policy and any public health intervention that you would ever make. So it's basically telling your colleagues, yeah, okay, great. You can give me your logistic regressions. You can give me your linear equations. Yeah, I know all that stuff. But if it doesn't have a story that gives context as to why I should give a damn about these numbers, it doesn't matter. Any intervention and any policy that you will come will always fall short because it doesn't have the stories or the context, the change in epistemology that is necessary for this to be as efficacious and efficient as it can be. We are the renegades, we are the rebels, we are the raging against the machine, and we're doing it with the stories. So if you're on this bandwagon, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much. I feel you so much on that. And then to the rest of the panelists, can you share how to develop stories for different audience? I know we talked about, David alluded to a policy change, and so we tell a different story to policymakers. Do we do that? Should we change stories for different audiences? What are your thoughts on that?
I'll add to it. We've all talked about authenticity. We've talked about, well, I'll add to it identification. Who are you? I don't feel like you can mix up, or you can tell a different story to, let's say, Evilise or Dr. Hernandez. I can't tell you one story, Dr. Hernandez. I can't tell you, Evilise, two different stories of who I am, right? I'm just have to give you the same story. I think oftentimes what I did, let me talk about myself, was I was so ashamed of who I was, right? Because I couldn't cross all the T's and dot all the I's and pronounce everything the right way. Like I kind of fell back a little bit. I dressed a certain way so I can feel like I fit in with the crew. Like, but once I began, and can be organization or company wide, it doesn't matter. Once you are competent, I believe that it breeds confidence, right? Competence breeds confidence, right? So if you are competent in your organization, in your mission, in whatever you're doing, right, your organization or your mission or your crew will start to gain confidence to where you can go out and tell your story boldly. And guess what? You don't have to worry about if it's accepted by the person you're talking to or the group you're talking to, because there will be, I repeat 20 million times, there will be somebody who is attracted to whatever you have. There's somebody who is picking up what you putting down.
I love that. And I think they covered it. The one thing I'll say is, so I agree, like my story is the same. I'm going to catch all of this everywhere I go. But the one thing I will say about stories especially, and it's more about where and how I share them, or I often tell my team, when you want vulnerability and you want folks to share, you model that. And so I invite folks that, maybe on a grant application, I mean, it depends, right? And this is where you need to figure it out, but like, you lead with what you want to receive, right? And I think there's something about when you want vulnerability and you're building trust, and you can decide which way that is and with who that is, then you need to lead with that. And that's what will carry. And we often say when we're training, if you want an opinion, then you listen first, right? And so I think those are the methods that I would offer, in terms of stories. If you're soliciting and getting opinions and you really want to hear from folks, then that's not the time for you to share. That's the time just for you to listen. But if what you're trying to do is elicit vulnerability and also build trust, then you have to lead with that and be maybe more vulnerable than you're even comfortable with, and push to the limits. Ashley Ellis says, share to the limits of your safety. So you want to share, but obviously to what you're comfortable with as well. So keep the story the same, but do it in the way that you feel, right, to the depth that you feel comfortable with or that you want to go to.
Thank you. I want to flip the script a little bit, and I want to see if each of you have a question for one another.
Yeah, I got a question, Ken. How can I get that $1 million in 10 years, yo?
Man.
I'm not there, bro.
Man, you know what? I wish there was a way to harvest that bread, right? But that money did come to raise my kids and feed my kids. I recently got burned out, man. Listen, after I had COVID in August, it was the worst 3 weeks of my life. I'm grateful that I survived it. I didn't even realize how bad it was. And then after that, I realized that I've never, out of 13 years of business ownership and entrepreneurship, I never took my kids on a vacation. Like, when I say never, I mean never. Like, that day I was on a huge project, man. I got one of the biggest invoices of my entire life at the end of September. I was working on another smaller project at the same time. When I finished that big project, I got my money, got it wired. It's the first time I ever had money wired. I thought the police was coming after me because it was wired, right? But I literally told the smaller project, listen, I apologize. This has never happened to me in 13 years, but I have to give you all your money back. I'll give you all the footage I shot, all the audio I shot. I'll help you find an editor, but I am completely and totally burned out. So I said all that to say, I literally had probably about 2 grand in my name. That, you know what I mean, at the moment, that was, literally before the wire came in, really. And I literally booked a vacation. I took me and my 3 kids out on this first vacation we ever went on. My kids 15, 14, and 4 years old, man. Right. So all that money was like, listen, oh, we got $1,000 invoice here. That means I gotta pay rent. That means I gotta pay the light. I gotta get groceries. It was like, nah, this was all money that was necessary for me to live. So, but literally head down, hand to the plow, like Eva Lee said, right? It was just like, I ain't looking up. Like I only can kill. I only eat what I can kill, right? Every day it's like the lion or the gazelle. Whatever I gotta do to survive and stay out of prison is what I gotta do, right? So I don't know, man. I think anybody can do it. It just depends on how bad you want it. Like ET said, if you want to live as bad as you want to breathe, or something like that. If you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe, then you'll make that thing happen, and that's exactly what I did.
Like your shirt, I can do anything, right? Any other questions for each other? And then I'll go into some questions. We have some questions in the chat from some of the attendees.
Yeah, I got a question. So when it comes down to I'm very particular about the words that I use. When it comes down to Latinos, Hispanics, like and let's throw Mexicans in there, right? Because my son just asked me the other day. He was like, Dad, one of my friends, I can't call him a Mexican. I was like, well, why not? He was like, because Dad, that's rude, it's wrong. And I was like, bro, but where is he from though? He was like, he's from Mexico. And I was like, bro, that's not wrong, right? But when it comes down to Hispanics and Latinos, right? How do we address a Hispanic? How do we address a Latino? How do we address an African versus a black man, a black person from America? And I think this is good for both of you.
Man, I mean, that's always evolving. It really, really is. So, there's a line from a track by Talib Kweli. We went from N-word to Negro to color to black, African American, and then right back to, and so it's constantly evolving the terminologies that we use to describe our ancestry. So I have no problem saying black, because black to me encompasses everything of the African diaspora. So whether you're African in America, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latina, doesn't matter. To me, you're of that diaspora. So I just say black, but that's my comfort level. I won't speak for Hispanic and Latinx, Latino. I'm learning because my wife is Latina. She's from Mexico. Even they are like, and it's different levels, because they don't seem to care. Like, you can say Hispanic. She says Hispanic all the time. I'm like, well, that's technically true, but it's like you can be a little bit more specific. So it depends on the person, your personal comfort level, and but the one thing, because now you're saying BIPOC, so what, black person of color. So I felt like that just hit the streets like a year or two ago. So it's constantly evolving. It's just, whatever your comfort level is.
I say you just ask, this is the same thing with pronouns. You just ask what the preferred way. And I lead with vulnerability. Like, oh, I don't know. What do you, I personally use Latinx or Latino, just because of the Hispanic, there's just different definitions there. But the way that I rock is like, what do you prefer? I will say, like, some of the acronyms, I'm intentional to say black when I mean, right? Like, instead of POC, I'm intentional with my words, because I don't want them to get crossed. But when talking with someone else, right? Like, and I think this is a part of like being in space, right? And what are you cool with? And when I mess up, oh, my bad, I messed up, and apologize if but like, this is what we're getting at is, right? Like, how do you be in community too? Like, because I mess up all the damn time. And instead of, right, like, how do we call in, right? How do we call in to be like, hey, Ken, my man. But I think that's just a process, like consent, working together, asking these questions. And if I take it to make it a little applicable too, I think one of the things that I'm not very good at, but I want to get better at, is also chatting, if we're talking about grants and applying, getting to know and talking with the grant makers and being like, yo, what happened? I poured my heart out. What's up? What are you looking for? How do you want me to speak? Because I'm going to come through on this Cardi B tip. But if you're looking for the Sonia Sotomayor, like, we can do that too. But I think asking and building these kind of relationships as well, I think brings incredible clarity.
Thank y'all so much. And I completely agree. I always ask before we move forward. So here are some of the questions, our first two questions from the audience. This first one is for any panelists. Can the speakers talk about defining the audience for your organization's story? We have several audiences, and y'all alluded to this a little bit earlier. We have several audiences: corporate funders, staff, volunteers, potential donors, and the community we serve. Should the story change based on the audience, and how do you do that? So it's very similar to what I asked, but I think, particularly because of grant writing, policy, like all of these audiences, like, should I be like Cardi B to, on the grant application to NIH that has these reviewers, like, okay, she even said the word oppressions. That's what I got from a reviewer. Don't say the word oppressions. So if you have any advice, because I think people are really desperate to fully understand that. We know about being your authentic self, but how do you, is it like code switching, like we have to do in our everyday lives?
Yeah, I will say this is one thing that my organization has struggled with. When we first started, we needed to be very corporate. The people that we talk to, we're in healthcare, so we're talking with hospital systems, we're talking with doctors. We are in tech, so we're talking with, investors and folks, right? We also talk to foundations, and then we literally are on the block, right? On the block with someone's auntie and abuela doing this work. And for a long time, I'm a master code switcher because I've done it. So I'd be here doing one thing, and then I'm like, and today we are a public benefit corp, and I'd switch. One of the things that I had to step into, and this is recent for me, it's even recent for my organization because we're reworking all of our language, our websites, like we're changing everything to have one voice and one tone only. But what I've learned, right, I'll say this, I was on a panel 2 years ago, and it was a conversation about erasing disparities in healthcare. And this is a well-known conference in San Francisco, and y'all can Google it, you'll see it. But, right, and I had to say, like, look, these are not health disparities. This is racism in healthcare. And I'm gonna say it. And the feedback that I got was, and this is on the panel, and this, they were like, hey, I don't think we can talk about this right now. We can't call it racism. But if we're gonna do it, can you at least give a disclaimer? And so I started this panel and I said, hey, y'all, I'm gonna give a disclaimer. We're gonna talk about racism in healthcare. And what that showed me was, one, I had to have that conversation ahead of time, say, this is what I'm gonna talk about. Had to kind of get buy-in from the folks who were with me. And so if you're writing out an application, right, like look, it's a privilege to say, like, I don't want NIS money, a privilege to say I'm not gonna turn it down if I can't speak about oppression. That is a privilege to have. We all don't have that. So you need to figure out what the language is and get folks and get buy-in on whatever side that is that you're going to be in. But then what I'll say is, I got the buy-in, and then I came out, racism in healthcare. And I have stuck to that message. I do not bite my tongue. I will always call out racism. And this isn't like unconscious bias, legit racism. I will always call it out. And what's happened is some of the folks that I've been on that panel with, right, or have heard me speak 2 years later, we revisit, and they're leading a panel saying, we're going to talk about racism in healthcare. And so these are not, and not everybody's meant to like lead that wave. It's something that, again, I have the privilege to do. This is my own personal privilege, but I would encourage you to stick with your story, stay true to it, because you're not wrong. You might just be early. You're not wrong to use oppression. You're not wrong to use this language. You just might be early for the industry, but they're coming.
I would like to add. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Okay. So I thank you for asking this question a different way, because yes, we all do have one story, right? We all got one story. But there are certain people who need different information in our story. Okay. I just wrote down a great example right here, right? Let's say Joy hired me to do to do a corporate recap from a conference that she put on for 3 days, right? You got investors, funders, and sponsors. You got participants, you got event vendors, and you got future participants, funders, vendors, and all the other good stuff, right? So once you learn to tell your entire story in a clear, concise, and a complete kind of way, fast and engaging, right? And keeping the viewers attention, you are able to meet the needs of everybody. The investor can see, oh, that this my money went to the lights and the sound and the audio and the video quality. All the sponsors get plugs, right? Everybody get a microphone and say, hey, my name is Jill, I'm from AARP, and I am proud to sponsor this event for Women's Empowerment 2019. The participants, they can see how much fun that they had at the event. Oh my God, it was amazing. The vendors that came, whoever provided the food. Why? Because when we tell a complete story, we got to show the food that was there at this event. Obviously, it's going to be a while before we do another event, but you get my point, right? You have to tell the whole entire story, complete, concise, in a clear kind of way, so that everybody who is involved in it can get the information that they need.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. So the reason I don't see it as, you don't want to code switch, because to me code switching is changing who you are. So the person that your homeboys or your homegirls may see may not be the same person that your colleagues in academia may see. I don't do that. No, you want to be consistent with who you are. What you may do is change the language with how you tell a story, or the orientation of how the story resonates with your audience. So I look at it this way: looking at a reduction in violence. So Baltimore, yes, is a violent city. It has been a violent city for generations. So we know it's a problem. We can tell the story of violence reduction to the community, and obviously they're going to think, okay, I don't have to worry about my child being killed. I don't have to worry about my family member being killed. If I speak this to the government, I could say, if you use violence, look at how much money is saved on the back end. These are the people that are no longer going to the hospital or going to ER. These are these are the people who are no longer, being incarcerated, and we're spending that money, more than we spend on education and a whole bunch of other things. But I won't go there. We don't have time for that. It's about what's gonna emphasize or really bring home the core narrative, which is we need to reduce violence. It's the what's in it for you. Think of it that way. What's in it for taxpayers? Okay, you're spending less money on incarceration and in the ER. What's in it for community? You're not worry about your family and your friends getting killed. So it's the same story, same premise, same goal: reducing violence. So you do have to think about your audience. You have to think about what's going to resonate with them. What language do they speak? Do they speak the language of money? Do they speak the language of policy? Do they speak the language of just humanity? It doesn't matter, but your story is still fundamentally the same. How you tell the story is different. That's why it's storytelling. Story plus telling equals storytelling.
Love it. Storytelling. We have a question from the audience. Paraphrase. One of the things I struggle with is that as a provider who receives grants, grant funders want stories, and sometimes providers will write up stories. I agree with Ibelisa's point about not wanting to tell other people's stories, but funders don't want our provider story. And if we work with very vulnerable populations who are struggling with serious mental illness, child welfare service, and homelessness, who can be overwhelmed with a request to tell their story. So how do we navigate sharing a story without telling someone else's? That's all of you. It's a deep question because
Yeah,
that's.
I agree. Thanks for that question too. So again, when it comes to healthcare, I know that there are certain laws and HIPAA. Like, I'm not even a healthcare geek, but I just know that when I go to the doctor, I gotta sign HIPAA, right? So there's certain things that you can and cannot tell. Evelise also talked about exploitation, right? We are telling these stories because we need money, but we're not telling these stories because we need money, right? So it's this weird in between balance. So in my when clients entrust me to tell their story, there are often times where I have to tell it and I can't show the face of the person. I have to tweak the voice a little bit. I did a story for a lady, one of my Latino clients who ran for school board here in Durham, and she lived in the projects. So we went back to the projects during a time where this particular housing area was under so much scrutiny from the living conditions that at the moment that we went in, folks was like they looked at her like, although she was from the project, she was from the area, they looked at her like, yo, What you doing here during this time? Are you exploiting the people so you can get more votes for school board? But she like, listen, no, I'm y'all. Like I'm from here, right? So, but guess what? We could not tell that story. We could not get the stories from the people because the timing was off. We go back at a different time. You can probably get a different story, or you can probably get that story. But it just depends on time. And then guess what? You just got to be creative if you want to get your message out. And Jill don't want to tell her story, or you don't want to exploit Jill for her story. You have to do something different. I can't tell you, but the entrepreneur in me is like, okay, I got to find a different way.
So
I
I'll also
agree
add,
wholeheartedly. Oh, okay, I'll go. All right. So yes, it's difficult. So I'm glad the question was asked, because this is something that you'll constantly navigate, that fine line between uh, empowerment and exploitation. So for me, I always err on the side of the people telling it if they are so empowered to do so, and I'll always put it in a way where you're not forced to tell your story. You can tell your story however you want to. That's kind of the point. And do it only if it's going to be empowering to you. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about the consequences. Use this as a platform to tell your story. If that's not possible, if people just aren't in that place because it takes time for people to feel that they are empowered to tell their story, like Ken said, you got to be creative. So if you got to find some way around it, so be it. But I would say definitely err on the side of letting the people tell their story. And again, I work funders with a nonprofit that I'm a part of, and that's the same thing. It's like, you don't need to hear from us. You need to hear from the kids who we serve. Let them tell the story of how they've transformed, because they'll be more convincing than we ever could be. They're the perfect storytellers for their story because it's their story. Now we know that there are parameters that may not always allow that. So we do our best to honor the story. So if you're in that situation where the person can't tell the story themselves, I would say as long as you are oriented towards honoring their truth, then you should feel okay with what you're doing. As long as they feel and you feel that you're not exploiting them, but you're honoring them, you're honoring their story, you're honoring the growth. So it's not about the poverty porn that we talk about a lot, not showing us just all the bad stuff. So people want to but show how they've grown, show how they've elevated, show how they're empowered, and you'll know that for yourself. You'll know if you're doing it right. So trust your gut, as they say, trust your heart, and you'll be fine.
I'll also add in there is, when are you coming to these folks? Are you only coming to them when you need a story for your application? Right? What position, what power are you giving up to the folks, right? And I think we talk a lot about, giving back and maybe the services, and this is no critique, so I don't know who you are, but right, we're giving back, we're doing good work, and that's enough. But what we want to ask is, like, are we giving up? What are we giving up? And there's an element of this where for applications, for the end of year fundraising, it's like, all right, come through, we need your voices and we need your stories. But if that's the exchange, then that's extractive, right? And so what we work at least with Radical Health is, I get paid to show up here. I get paid to show up, and do circles in my community. My community needs to get paid as well to show up, right? And especially when we're looking at big institutions. So when you're writing that grant, when you're writing, the proposals and you're thinking about this, we have to think too about the economics. And so to your point, Ken, like, if I'm just using your story to get this grant and my grant is going into services, but there is no money going back into the folks whose story you use, there's no compensation, there's nothing, then that's not equitable and that's not equity, right? And this is a challenge that, like, I'm also calling out, as we do this work, because we can't keep getting your STAR program participants to be up on all the brochures. I mean, there's plenty of times, if you look on the internet, I'm on a lot of people's websites right now, but fine, right? And sometimes, right, I'm learning this too. This is a learning. But I do think that there's an element of, what else are we giving back? What else are we giving up? And how else are people are way more than just the stories they can tell to get you a grant. So get them a board seat, get them a side hustle, a gig. Like, we have other things that we can do that are not just even monetary, but are that, like, appreciation and, like, kind of reinvestments back into these folks and into our communities.
Thank you so much for that honesty. I appreciate it, because that's something that as a Latina academician, I face all the time, where, my time is exploited to be sort of like an afterthought and not in the very beginning of addressing some of the issues. One thing I also wanted to add to that is I often get community consent as well. Every time I work in a community, I make sure I talk to them and I lay it all out and be very transparent and honest about what the goals are. I want them at the table from the very beginning, and I want their consent to be able to work with them. And that's something that we've been, that's been happening for a long time. But then our work gets taken without consent, like the way our people got taken without consent. So I'll end there. Another question is for Ken. And Ken, I think, we gave you some background information about the Maternal Telehealth Access Project. This person says, I love the framing of the hero, conflict, resolution, and music. I love that too. Who is our hero in our telehealth program? Is it access to telehealth?
That's a good question. Wow. Yeah, you gave me some background, but yeah, I didn't do all of my homework. Forgive me. So, Dr. Hernandez, can you give me a quick rundown? And you know what the crazy part about it is, I got the email. It's sitting right here about the organization. So please forgive me. Can somebody give me a quick rundown, and I'll tell you exactly who the hero
Yeah,
is.
no problem, no problem. So it's a group of us that got money from CARES Act to be able to give access, because of the pandemic, women getting their maternal health services through the use of telemedicine or telehealth, which is a more broad term. And so in this story, I guess what they're saying is, or the question is telehealth, is access to health the hero? Who's the hero in it? Is it the people? Is the actual access? Is it the outcomes? Who's the hero in all of this?
Hey, that's a great question. So, and thank you for giving me that background. So I say the heroes are the individuals that is driving this engine. Okay. And here's why: people buy people. They don't buy products and services. Again, people buy people. They don't buy products and services. The reason why I'm so dope as a filmmaker and photographer is not because I'm the dopest filmmaker and photographer on the East Coast. It's because I'm surrounded by the dopest filmmakers and photographers on the East Coast, right? And my clients believe that I'm the dopest for whatever their project is, right? So people, they do business with me. Like, I would go to, if I was to tell them a story, I would find out who are the drivers of this entire project, and I would tell a story of each one of those. Like, people just want to hear stories, and then the fact that telehealth would then become the byproduct, right? It's like, these are some dope individuals, and what they have to sell, like what they have to offer, like, let me go see more about this. And then the people that go see more about it are the people who can use the services, the people that can donate to the services, right? It's just like this whole plethora of people who are now attracted to Dr. Hernandez and everybody else who is driving this thing. And I'll leave you with a quick story. Yeti, I think it's called Yeti. I think it's the cooler. It's a cooler. Is that it? Okay. So if you look, and I don't even subscribe to cable, but just the ads that I've seen, Yeti, when they have their commercials, right? They don't mention the doggone cooler. They don't mention the thermos. They don't mention none of that joker, right? The whole entire ad, whether it's 30 seconds or 45 seconds, 15 seconds, is just geared towards something else. And then at the end, you'll see that little doggone cooler just sitting right there with the brand on it. Right. So it had nothing to do with the product or service itself. They was just drawn to the story, and the product and service became a byproduct.
Thank you so much. And we have like one more minute. So Ivelisse, let me see if I can, this question is for you. It says, can you talk more about the impact of storytelling on health, which you did allude to a little bit more, especially if we as providers are under pressure to pack a lot of information into a patient visit? We may not have lots of time with a patient. How do we incorporate the healing power of storytelling in that context?
Yeah, that's a good one. And look, you have real constraints from a system. So like, I'd be silly if I was up here being like, you could have a whole circle. What I will say is, right, some of the benefits of this. One, you can incorporate your own story into your visits with patients. So you have a condensed amount of time, right? But like, it meant the world to me when I had, you know, my doctor who was helping me deliver my baby say, hey, you know, I had to have a C-section when I was giving birth, and this is what it was like, and I had to do an epidural, and she put her hand on my shoulder and was able to tell me about her experience. And that made, I mean, it wasn't a big thing, it was so crazy, but made a big difference from me, from her to incorporate, you know, and to ask me, hey, what's up? What are you thinking about right now? That's one thing. The other thing that I'll say is, right, and this is where we start to challenge the system a bit, is when you have storytelling happening in community, especially let's say you have a certain zip code or a block of people that you're working with, maybe who are all pregnant at the same time, right? Those stories, and whether they happen outside of the clinic, right, will inform how your clinic runs and walks and talks and how it can operate. On top of that, right, what we really work towards is creating all the hacks that people need to know. So we tell folks, right, like, does your hospital you're going to deliver have a hemorrhage plan? You want to ask, because that one doesn't have a very good one. And just in case, you want to know. So the ability to have stories happening outside, help people learn from one another. And it's the same way like Instagram influencers do their job. And they tell you to buy all this makeup. It's because we're sharing those stories and our experiences. And I think the ability to do that outside the system will help transform the system. We're moving to a place, and I'll say this big picture, we're moving to a place where we can incorporate this into the actual practice, that this is a part of healthcare. Some places do it already, but we want to get to a place where we can merge that and see that happen a little bit more.
Thank you so much. And just to let you know, people didn't have questions, but they were like, yeah, that part, amen. 10,000%, not even 100, 10,000%, that needs to be on a billboard. So we just want to thank you so very much. Thank you for your time. We're grateful for your time and the information you share, the advice, the stories that you shared, your own personal stories, being vulnerable. We just are so grateful for you all. I just want to remind the audience to fill out the evaluation in the chat. Of course, you know, there's always going to be some type of evaluation. And to go to the website. I think the evaluation is in the chat. Again, you'll see that in the chat. And if you can please go to our website, maternalhealthlearning.com, you will find the webinar there, as well as other resources that are available to you. But again, thank you to our presenters. Thank you to the team that put this together. We hope that you enjoyed. And if you have any other burning questions, you know, just put them in the chat and we'll see how we can get them to our presenters to answer. Thank you.